that faces the Atlantic, and it doesn't look like they need very much right along there. But if you go around to the other side of the island, you find people who are basically just farmers and fishermen, and it's really poor. So just moving from one side of the island to the other really changes what you're looking at. So if you have time to visit those project areas, and you can visit Rotary clubs and ask them what kinds of things they're doing, then you're getting a good start on what you can do. If you don't have a traveler, and there are plenty of people who, plenty of clubs that don't have travelers. If you're in a small town and everybody works nearby, look around and see where the travelers are. Quite often there's a church right around the corner, and they have a mission somewhere, and they make trips to that country all the time. And if you haven't thought about it, then maybe all you have to do is find out what they're doing, and you might find that in your Rotary Club you have some people that already are in that church, and they could join one of those trips. Now you've got a traveler, and you can use the people that are traveling frequently on those kinds of projects to keep up with your own project. So it's a nice relationship having some association with something like a church or a nonprofit organization in your town that works overseas. They might have connections that would help you find a project. You can also travel with other Rotary clubs. If there's a club that's doing a project in Africa somewhere, you could say, I ask if you can go on one of their trips. And if a bunch of them are going, you learn a little bit about the travel and how you get there, and you meet some people, but you can be there looking for other project opportunities as a way to, and use that Rotary Club as a way to get you into an area and meet some people that are interested in projects. So all of these are just ways to start to make overseas connections that are really important. Group study exchange, some of you remember when we used to do that. We can use a group study exchange specifically to find projects. We could put one together just to do that, and the travel for that group of people going to look for projects could be paid by a district grant. Any travel that you do in search of a project qualifies. You just have to submit a district grant. And I think most of you have experience with that, but you'll hear about it this afternoon if you go to the afternoon session. Again, if you have any questions about any of this, just put it in the chat. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is find.
And we have one question. There's a little confusion about exactly what a community assessment is, and this might be a good time to talk more about that.
Okay. We had community assessments before, and I'm going to come to it again later, but a community assessment is a study of the needs of a particular area, a particular group of people. Once you've decided where you want to work, then you go back and you decide, is what I'm thinking about doing the most important thing to do? And that's what a community assessment is. You look at both the strengths and the needs in that area and try to find something that fits the people's capability and also their needs. Okay. All right. Now you got to find a host sponsor. So you need a club in the country where you're going to do the grant. And I think you probably all remember that. If you're going to do a global grant, you have to have 2 clubs. One of them has to be in the country where the grant is. And so I'm talking primarily about a classic global humanitarian grant. And so there are little twists on this, but generally you're looking for a club in another country where you're going to do this, and you've been traveling in order to try and find that. Now, there are a lot of clubs, and you don't necessarily want to partner with the first one you find. You want somebody that's experienced in grants. So when you go, you ask them if they've done any. And if they're in a country that has a lot of needs and they haven't done any grants, there might be a reason. You might want to talk to them about why they haven't done any grants, because there's probably lots of opportunities. They have to be willing to work with your club and accept a balanced relationship. And that's a little bit tricky. There are some clubs out there that are willing to to be the host sponsor for a grant, but they want your club to do all the work. And that's not okay with RI, and it shouldn't be okay with us either. We want a balanced relationship. And we don't want a club that says, we've got this and we'll do all the work, you just give us the money, because you're not going to have a lot of fun with that. And you want to have some involvement in the project. So make sure that you get some balance, and there's going to be some things you can do. You want to make sure that they are qualified. Both the district and the club that you're working with are qualified. You don't want to find out at the end that that you've got everything ready to go and they're not qualified. There's a couple of reasons why they might not be qualified, and they might have a grant that they did before that's been open for a long time, and that'll keep them from getting new grants. Or it might be that they just didn't go through the qualification process, and that's a district specific thing. Their qualification process may not be like ours, and so they may be able to get qualified quickly, but we would want to start on that right away if this is the club you want and they aren't qualified.
Jim, we have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay, you want to do it now?
Well, I don't know, but they want to know, travel via a district grant, does it require them to pay 50%? I think that's pretty important to tell them.
Yes, they do. They, just like every other district grant, they do pay half of it.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Okay. Let's see, where were we? Personal relationships. Yes, if you want, I mean, a really personal relationship, not I've been to the club 3 times, but I'm communicating regularly with somebody in the club, so that you're starting to build a relationship where you can talk about everything that's happening. There's going to be a lot of things that happen as you build this, and you want to have a personal relationship. Okay, now if you've got a club and you've got a location, you've got to look for project areas. You can go to RI and say, if you talk to the grants officer, what other projects happened in this country? There's a grants officer for each country. In the US, for each district, we have, you know, it depends on which district you're in, which officer you get. But so you can ask that officer what kind of grants are going on, and you get at least an idea of what kinds of things are possible. You can ask local officials if they have done a needs assessment, and that's maybe not the same thing as our community assessment, but they'll know what you're talking about, and they may tell you, well, the things we need the most here are water and sanitation, or what we really want is a new hospital, you know. And okay, whatever they think is important is an interesting view of what the community wants. So it's a good thing to talk to those local officials if you can. The clubs might have ideas. Your club might have ideas about what they would like to do, and the other club that you're dealing with, they may have project ideas that they've been thinking about for a while, and those may be good. So make sure you put those in your thinking cap. And the other thing is to look for a specific population. The club you're visiting might say, well, I don't know what we ought to do, but there's a refugee camp about 2 miles down the road, and they are bound to need something. And so you could say, oh, all right, there's a specific population that, that we can go assess. And I always like to look for local community health committees, because that's a very local group of people that quite often women who are meeting regularly and talking about the needs of their community. And so those are really good people to talk to. And you might say, before I even pick a project, I want to pick a good health committee, because a good health committee is going to be a great contact all the way through your project. And after your project is finished, they're going to be an important part of sustaining the benefits of that project. So all of this just to find a project area. Now let's talk about who lives there. You want to define the beneficiaries, and remember that beneficiaries are people. Many people will say when they're first starting out, well, I found this nonprofit organization and they do A, B, and C, and what we want to do is help that nonprofit. And so you think the beneficiary is the nonprofit, but that's not right. The beneficiaries are the people the nonprofit is serving. And that's who you want to analyze. So you look for the people and then you count them. And the reason you want to count them, you want to think about not only how many beneficiaries there are in the region, but how many of them are going to benefit from what you do. If you say nobody in this community of 1,000 people has potable water, and we're going to drill a well and they're going to have water, then you're going to help 1,000 people. But if they say a lot of people in this community have a medical problem, and we're going to run a program that treats that medical problem, then your beneficiaries are the people who have the problem, not the whole community. So that doesn't mean that the second example is not a good one. It still might be exactly what they want. It may be on the top of their list to solve that problem. So, I mean, there are places in the world where malaria is the biggest problem they have because it kills a very large percentage of infants. And so giving those people bed nets is going to save a lot of lives. So once you've talked about who the beneficiaries are, then you want to ask what they need the most. And that's what a needs assessment, a community assessment, is really all about. Okay.
Jim, I'd like to interject here. I see a lot of people busily taking notes, which is super, and you may have the PowerPoint in front of you, but if it's not already up, you will be able to download it from the district website. So you don't have to try to write down everything, all the important information. It will be there.
Yeah. Debbie, I sent it to everybody who was registered yesterday. So I think that's probably what they're scribbling on.
Well, that's even better.
Okay. Okay, so here's some details about the community assessment. You want to work with a local club. You don't have to go and do it yourself. It might be that the local club is going to do it, and it's one of the things that they're going to do. It might be that you want to send one person to participate. You can involve community health groups and government groups. That's a good thing to do. The more groups you have involved in it with different perspectives about needs, the more likely you're going to get a complete picture of assets and needs. And the reason you want assets, sometimes this is pretty obvious. You don't want to deliver refrigerators to a community that doesn't have electricity, right? And so just because refrigerators would help them. And that's perhaps obvious, but there are a lot of other things that are maybe a little bit subtle. The assets that the community has may tell you something about what they can support. And you want them to be able to support what you give them. So that's why you want to think about those things. Then if you've got a list of their strengths and weaknesses, their assets and their needs, then you want to select a project that's near the top of the needs list. Doesn't have to be the top one. Like I said before, if they say, well, what we really need is a new hospital. Well, we don't usually do global grants for building hospitals. We might have a global grant for putting equipment in a hospital, but we don't usually build them. And then you want to make sure that the time and the scope of work is interesting to the clubs. Some clubs are out there looking for things that are more interesting to engineers, because they got a club full of engineers that wants to do projects. You're going to end up with different things than a club that has a lot of people that are more interested in youth and education. And so you want to make sure that the involvement and the scope of work is going to excite your club. Then think about special expertise, because there are many times where you're a little bit lacking. And it might be that you can rely on the Rotary Club in the country, your partner, but my club has worked in Haiti, and we don't know any Haitian Creole, you know? And so while we were capable of developing some of the stuff that we wanted to deliver to the people there, we had to find somebody that could help us with translation and delivering information to the beneficiaries in Creole, because that's the language that they speak. So so that's one of the reasons why you need expertise. There might be technical expertise. There are some projects where Bradley Sunrise did a project in Togo, and they got some really, really good help from Engineers Without Borders. And so to make sure that their project was technically successful. So when you are looking for projects, look around for relevant examples of success. Again, you might think this is obvious, but you got a community that doesn't have water. You don't want to say, I'm going to drill a well if people in the next town over haven't drilled a well successfully. If nobody is drilling wells, there's a good chance that there's no water. And so you aren't going to go doing that kind of exploration without being really sure that you're going to be successful. And then you have to be aligned with one of the 6 focus areas. The 6 focus areas are fairly broad, but they are quite focused over time. And there's some good reasons for that, and we'll talk about the details of the focus areas a little bit later. So now you got a community assessment, and you can cover that. If you have to travel for it, you can cover that with a district grant also. But as I said at the beginning, you don't necessarily have to be there in order to have this happen. Okay, so the community assessment is here. And again, try to get a new copy of this rather than looking at an old one, because it'll change from time to time. RI is always working on these forms. Okay, the areas of focus. They are focused by the trustees for a couple of reasons. The trustees want to make sure that we are doing things that we can roll up and compare to each other, learn from what we've done other places, do it better and better, and be sure how to do it right so that it's going to be sustainable. And so they are often saying, well, here's a part of this area of focus that people have been doing, it hasn't worked very well, or it hasn't been efficient. An example is education and literacy. And we had, for a few years, we had an ability to build simple schools as part of education and literacy. And we didn't get very many people that tried it, and they turned out to be kind of difficult. The simple school was a very carefully defined thing, and so they're phasing that out. They've got a few projects they're finishing, but I don't think we're starting any new ones. So it's best to have only one area of focus in your project. There are some that fit very well with 2, but every time you add another area of focus, you've got more policy statements and more goals you have to look at, and more people that are going to review your project. Every area of focus is going to get a separate review, and you're going to get a separate set of questions. And every person who is an area of focus manager for the Rotary Foundation wants you to hit a home run in their area of focus. So an example is, let's say you're going to provide water somehow for a community, and you say, okay, so that's a project in water and sanitation. But also that can be a project in education and literacy, because if they have water, the kids don't get sick, and if they don't get sick, they go to school more, and so they're going to learn more, and it's going to help with maternal and child health, because mothers and babies aren't going to get sick if we've got clean water, and all of those things are true. But if you look at the goals for maternal and child health, you'll see that you're not addressing them very well. The first question in maternal and child health, when you look at the goals, is what impact are you going to have on the maternal mortality rate? And if you don't have a measurable mortality rate that you're sure you're going to change, then you aren't really working in the right area of focus. So that water project becomes a water project. Water, sanitation, hygiene, that's what you want to work on. And yes, all of those other things are going to get better, but you want to have a primary area of focus if you can. Like I said, sometimes there's an exception, and you really have two things you're doing very well, and so you can have two areas of focus, but you don't have to. And then you want to pick specific goals you're going to be aligned with. And you do that by going to this area of focus policy statement. And this is a document. It's about a dozen pages long. And I'm going to show you a few excerpts from it so you get an idea of what it is. Okay, so now we have 7 areas of focus, and actually 6.5, because the last one, supporting the environment, we've got the title, but we don't have the goals developed. So you can't start a project yet on supporting the environment. You can think about it, but until we have the goals and objectives of that area of focus, you can't really get aligned with it. But in all of these others, you can, and they're pretty well defined. So let's talk about water and sanitation. It's a relatively simple one, and look at what the area of focus looks like. So this is a policy and goals statement that you get right out of that 12-page document that you can download. And so the policy statement is, we're looking for community sustainable access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. Okay, now you don't have to do all of those, but you do have to do several. And so then you look at the goals. You want to look at which things you're actually affecting with your project. If you think you know what your project is, what I tell people to do is print out this 12-page thing and go through it with a highlighter and highlight places where you say, yes, I'm doing that. We are ensuring sustainable access to water when we drill a well to provide potable water. And so I just highlight that. And then universal access to safe and affordable drinking water. Oh, is it affordable? Yeah, it is. Okay. So improving water quality with service and groundwater, maybe not. Facilitating universal access to sanitation, I might not be doing that. Hygiene knowledge, I better be doing that, because they won't like it if you're not doing hygiene along with the water, because you got to keep the water clean. And the last one's interesting. Strengthening the capacity of governments and institutions to maintain this kind of stuff. You may be working in a community where they've got water, but they can't keep it clean. You know, they maybe make clean water, but they got pipes that are not clean, and they don't know how to keep that clean. And so anything you can do to make that part of it work better is really valuable. You're building the capacity to maintain stuff more than putting in new stuff. So anyway, this is an example of a statement of purpose and goals. And if you go through all of those 12 pages and you highlight the things, now you can step back and just look at the pages that have a lot of highlighter on them. That's where your area of focus really is.
Hey, Jim, excuse me. I have a question in the chat box, and they want to know if you know when the goals and objectives for the environmental focus area will be developed, established.
Sometime in the spring. I can't remember exactly, but they do have a goal date somewhere between March and June. And then they're going to start accepting grant applications a few months after that. So it's probably a grant in the next Rotary year. If you want to work in that area, you can maybe start working toward the end of this Rotary year, but you won't be able to apply until sometime next Rotary year. Okay, now we've talked about all of these different processes. You can take these steps in any order. You can talk about where, who the beneficiaries are, what the needs are, the project. But as you go through and you think about each of these areas, you might change your mind about something you did before. Particularly if you start with, I think I know what project I want. Now I've got to go find a location and a partner. Because you might find a location and a partner and your partner would rather do something else. Or you might be working in a location where the beneficiaries say, our top need is something else. So, so as you go through this, you review these things and then review them again and make sure that they're all consistent. And you're doing this all without filling out the application. So you don't want to go back and have to rewrite it, that kind of stuff. So if you're there, now you want to write this little 2-sentence summary. And I am challenging people to put this in 2 sentences because it's really easy when you see a big open text field and they say, give us a short summary of your project to start with once upon a time. And you go on and on and on and on about what you tried and this and that and the other. And what they really want is this. This is a hypothetical example, but if you can say, the Rotary Clubs of Cleveland, Tennessee, USA, and La Paz, Honduras will partner to provide potable water to the high school and surrounding community in Lejamani, Honduras, by providing a borehole well, pump, and water tank on the school property, plus hygiene training. They'll serve 4,000 people who don't have access to potable water. You know who the beneficiaries are. You know what you're delivering. You know where it is. You know who the partners are. You know which parts of the area of focus you're dealing with. You know the total area of focus. It all comes right out of these 2 little sentences. And now when the grants officers see that, they say, okay, I know who needs to review this, and I know what kinds of questions they're going to have. Because this doesn't have everything in it. Again, it doesn't have the budget. It doesn't have the specifics of which pump you're using and what kind of a well you're gonna have in there. And the experts at Rotary, they know those kinds of things. They know those questions. But this gets it to just the right place right away. So that's why. And so you may work at this a little while to get it down to 2, maybe 3 sentences, but you definitely don't want 500 words. Okay. Questions? We're to the end of part 2.
Okay, there was a question earlier and Ron answered it, but I don't know if you want to elaborate. How do you determine whether a club is qualified? And do you sign an agreement with the other club regarding who will do what?
Yes and yes. You know if the other club is qualified because their district has to qualify them. And RI doesn't know, but the district knows. You know if the district's qualified by asking RI. They will tell you if the district is qualified. There is a memorandum of understanding, which we'll get to in part 3, and that's where you write down the responsibilities for what each of the clubs is going to do, and if you have a cooperating organization, what they're going to do. So did I answer all 3 parts of that?
Well, I would just add, having just finished being the District Rotary Foundation Chair, that I would have to sign on the grant that the club involved was qualified. I have to swear that as the District Foundation Chair. Yep. So it would be impossible not to have a club qualified and be on the grant.
Yes, but if you were just starting out, you would want to ask before you got to the point of submitting the grant, right? You wouldn't want to find out that this club is not qualified after you had done all of that work.
Yes, that, because then they would have to get qualified, and that could take a while.
Right, depending on the district and that sort of thing. Some districts can do it pretty quickly, and others, well, and there may be reasons why they're not qualified too. You know, if we've seen that some places where a club has not done very well on things before, and they got to show that they can do better one way or the other.
I think you raised the question earlier of you need to check into whether you want to do a grant with someone who's never been qualified.
Right. If they haven't had grants, there are questions to ask, right? There may be good reasons, but why they're just the right partner for you, but generally you don't want to blaze that trail if you don't have to. Okay, any more questions? I think we're doing pretty well on time. So we're going to take a break. How about do you have a timer, Beth?
No. Do you?
I don't know. I sent it to you. Anyway, let's take a 3-minute break, and I'm going to take a 1-minute break myself, but I'll be back. And if anybody wants to chat about any of this stuff, we can do that for a couple of minutes. Beth, please keep time.
I will.
Okay.
Hey, Debbie. Hey, Beth.
Hey, how are you, Erin?
Good to see y'all this morning. I miss getting together in person.
Oh, I know. This is the way of the world at the moment, but hopefully it won't be forever.
It's frustrating having a large club.
It is.
Good to see you too, Erin. Guess how many people we have? Well, you can tell if you look down there. Right now there's 73, but we've had as many as 77.
Well,
And
that's
I'm
good.
counting 41 clubs represented. I think that's pretty amazing.
I
It
think
is.
so.
We look at something like this as a real challenge, and we've all worried over it and fretted and carried on, but the real benefit, I think, is that we're reaching a whole lot of new people, as well as people who have done this before. So there's always a bright
Right.
side, I guess.
And I didn't have to
Teaching you
get up and drive to Cookville this morning.
Yeah.
Although it's a beautiful drive from here.
It's
Yeah.
a better ride.
I know. So today's a great day to ride, John.
Shut up, Aaron.
Hey, at least you have a bike.
I just mapped out Key West and found out that was 1,013 miles. So that might be another good one there.
Yeah.
You're talking about biking to Key West?
Motorcycles.
Yeah.
So last Friday it was nice. So I rode to Notre Dame and back. That was 1,033 miles.
Can you see that little countdown there?
Not yet. There it is. 2 minutes to go.
Less.
Anybody have any questions or anything?
I don't have a question, Jim, but this is a great presentation.
Thank you. It's the first time we've done it this way, but so far it's going okay.
It's excellent.
I had to knock your screen off to put mine up there.
That's okay. I think we can find it back.
Okay.
Hi, this is Jan Berry. I'm from Lenore City,
Yeah.
and I'm the president-elect, and I didn't know until a few minutes ago that there was president-elect training next. And so, will there be another time when it's available?
The president-elect training won't start till this finishes. We have like a 15-minute break in between, and I hope the timing works out that way. So you can stay with this if you want, but both will be offered again in October. It's
Okay.
like somewhere in the middle of October. I forget exactly which day it is.
I think it's
Saturday.
the 17th, maybe.
I think that sounds good.
Yeah, I can't go then. Okay, I better stay on then. Thanks.
Okay. We'll make sure you get there. In fact,
Debbie?
everybody who's on this Zoom is going to be on that one, so you're in good company. Okay, there's the bell. Okay, so I'm going to go back and share my screen again.
Jim, while you're doing that, a quick housekeeping. I show two Debbies. Debbie from South Campbell County, but I'm not sure who the other Debbie is. If you could let me know who you are, we'll make sure your club gets attendance. And if there's anyone besides Greg Maciolik with the name of Greg on the Zoom as well, please let me know that. Other than that, I think I've got everybody.
I think they said it was Greg Taylor.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I tried to fix that. It shows up as Greg Trailer Lafayette now on mine.
Ah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Debbie, one thing you can do is you can, in the chat, you can message to individual people if you want them to identify themselves better.
I have.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Okay, so the next part is about completing a global grant application. Is everybody back? If you aren't back, please raise your hand. We're going ahead. Okay, so yes, the application can be overwhelming, but I'm gonna try to help you with that. It's good to talk to the grant staff. You know, they will always be encouraging. I've found them so good at unless you're really doing something that you aren't supposed to be working on, something that's not in the area of focus, that sort of thing. If you got an idea, then they're always encouraging. So yeah, there is a lot of information, but it's not that hard if you take it in the right pieces. Again, we got places like, here's a hot link that'll take you to the staff contacts, and you can find contact information for the people that you need to talk to. Okay, so I tell everybody to start with the online template, not the grant module. Grant module, these are both online things, but the template is actually a Word document you download. And I sent each of you a copy of that. And I hope you all have it, because I'm going to refer to it, and it's easy for you to flip around and see what I'm talking about. It's an editable Word document, and you can share it by email, and you can even put it on something like Google Docs and work on it there. So everybody can work on it all at once. And you can't do that very well when you're working inside the grant module. And once you've got alignment and everybody thinks most of this stuff is complete, then you can start transferring it. You just cut and paste from your Word document into the grant module, and it shows up there. Does that make sense? Okay, so you're all looking at this application template, and it has these tabs. If you're in the module itself, they're called tabs. If you're looking at the document, they're called steps. But it's the same 12 things, and you're going to go through all of these, not necessarily in order. So the first thing to do is something that's really rewarding. You go through and you delete the fields you don't need for the kind of grant that you have. And because you're working in a Word document, I say you can absolutely delete them. Just get them out of there. And so there are fields related to VTT grants and scholarship grants in steps 6, 7, and 10. And in that document I gave you, they're all highlighted. So if you flip through there and look at that, you'll see the part that you would delete if you have a humanitarian grant. Now, does everybody know the difference between a humanitarian grant and a VTT and a scholarship? Those are the three basic types of global grants, and 95% of the grants are humanitarian grants. There's a few percent that are VTTs and scholarships, but most people are talking about doing humanitarian grants. Okay, so you can delete those steps, and lo and behold, your 12-page document just lost 3 pages, maybe 3.5 pages. Doesn't that make you feel better? Okay, then you go back to steps 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and about half of these steps you can probably fill in already, because this is the stuff that you did when you were back in part 2, and you talked about who is the who's the partner, what's the location, who are the beneficiaries, that kind of information you're ready to put in. So let's just put in the stuff you know, and then we're going to go back and fill in all the blanks. Okay, so in step 2, you have committee members, and you need to have committee members for both the host club and the international club. And there's a lot of questions that people ask. They say, oh, well, do they all have to be in the club? Yes, they do. Do they, in both clubs, they have to be inside the club if you have a club-sponsored grant. And you can have a district-sponsored grant, and then they all have to be in that district. You can have other people who are involved, but they aren't on the committee, because you want the committee to really be responsible, and so they got to be part of a club which is responsible. So you can fill those things in, and then you can talk about participants like cooperating organizations. Like I said, that's usually for technical expertise or maybe cultural, translational kind of things. You might have other partners or volunteer travelers, but generally you don't have volunteer travelers. Other partners also relatively infrequently, but it could be groups or individuals who are working on the project that you want to think of as a partner, other than the 2 primary partners. Okay, so you work on those things. Those are a little bit more than what you learned in the first part, probably, because generally you're working with one person. You don't have all the committees identified, but you might have them already. Okay. Step 7, under participants, you have to have an MOU signed by the host sponsor, the international sponsor, and the cooperating organization. There can be 1 or 2. I bet you could have 3, but I think the form only shows space for 2. The MOU talks about the responsibilities of each of those, and I'm going to show you typical responsibilities. It says typically, but you can change this. You can have the international sponsor or the host sponsor. You could shift some responsibilities from one to the other. So typically the host sponsor has these kind of responsibilities. They might have technical and professional support that they provide. They might provide the training. They also might coordinate the training, and somebody else provides it. Community education, public relations, community support. All of this stuff is generally stuff that the host country does because they are close to the project. But they don't have to. If you have a traveler or a cooperating organization that's better able to do some of these things, you can shift it from here to those to the other pages. The host sponsor normally manages the grant funds and pays for things. But there are times, a good example is something in medicine where you want to provide a piece of medical equipment and the appropriate training and maintenance and that sort of stuff to some hospital overseas. Then you're going to spend most of the money in the country where the equipment comes from. And so that's probably, let's say it's the US, then the grant funds might be managed in the US, even though the equipment gets installed overseas. And then there's reports. The host sponsor normally does do the project reports, but sometimes the international sponsor takes the lead on that. Okay, international sponsors responsibilities could be any of these things, and it could be more. I really want the international sponsor to be making sure that you keep conversations going, that you get involved in reporting, and I want the international sponsor to always do monthly reports. One of the reasons is for larger projects, we'll go to other districts and get them to support our project, and they would like to know what's going on. And there isn't any way for them, if they aren't one of the partners, to go to the grants pages in the RI website and see what's happening. They can't see that stuff. So they have to rely on us to tell them. And if you were asking people for money in any other kind of a situation, you would have to give them reports on what you're doing with their money. So it's a good, fair thing to do. And then you got the cooperating organization, and what they're doing is very, very project specific. You want to put down that specifically what you're counting on them to do, what reports they're going to have, that they are going to support an audit if you have one, all of those kinds of things. They may be supporting the project after the funding is over, because you have to have some way of supporting the project. Sometimes the cooperating organization is the way to do it. That doesn't have to be, but those are all things to think about when you fill out the MOU. And then everybody signs it. Okay, so what could go wrong? Okay, we've got the definition of what we're doing, and we're starting to put all the pieces together, but there are a lot of entities, and there are a lot of things that could go wrong. So what do you think could go wrong? Take 20 seconds and think of 3 things and put them in the chat.
Okay, before you get into those questions, I have a question asking which is the host sponsor and which is the international?
You know, a lot of people get that wrong, because we think we're working somewhere else, so they must be international, but they're the host. The host is the country where the project is. They are hosting the project. And so in most cases, if we're working on a project overseas, we are the international sponsor. And so many people get that wrong that when you're on the website and you enter it, if you find you did it wrong, there's a button you can push and it reverses them, because a lot of people make that mistake.
Okay, here are some of the things that can go wrong. Global unrest, foreign governments pull the plug on the project, travel bans, which we have right now, equipment or supplies not delivered on time, COVID, pandemic prevents travel, one of the sponsors doesn't meet their commitments, documentation fails, lack of follow-through, misunderstanding of engagement, unintended consequences. The grant mischaracterizes the category of the request. That's interesting. Lack of communication, natural disaster, change in personnel with club leaders.
Yep, all of those things happen. Some of them were something that would go wrong during the application review process, and that could happen. But if you're careful, you can make sure that that you don't get roadblocks there. Some of them are roadblocks that come up while you're executing the project, and there are almost always some things that happen, and you have to get around them. One of the things that I've seen with the Rotary Foundation is they never say, "Oh, that's too bad, I guess you have to quit." they always say, "Oh, that's interesting. What are you going to do about it?" They want you to keep going, because once they've committed the money to this, they want to see it through one way or the other. And you may change scope. You may change the size of the project if something happens with financing or something like that. But anyway, the most common things are communication errors, or people not doing what they said they were going to do. And those things all have to do with having a really good personal relationship with somebody on the other end of the string. So, okay, lots of things that can go wrong. I agree. Okay, so conflict of interest is one of the sections, and this is in step 2. And the main thing is to see the definition that's in step 2. Tells you what the definition is of a conflict of interest. And so this is really important. I want everybody to raise your hand if you have, raise your hand just like this, you know, put it up in front of the screen. If your club has potential conflicts of interest, raise your hand like this. Okay, now I can't see all of your hands, but I can tell you that if you didn't raise your hand, you made a mistake, because all clubs have potential conflicts of interest, and they are not a problem. In fact, that's a sign that you've got an active club. If you've got a club with no conflicts of interest, no potential conflicts of interest, I'll show you a club that doesn't do very much. Because if you've got active people in the community, they are doing things which can potentially be a conflict of interest. So, for example, let's say you're doing something and you're gonna do landscaping, right? If somebody in your club says, well, I have a landscaping company, and I will sell the plants to the project for a really good price. Do we have a conflict of interest? We certainly have a potential conflict of interest. Here's somebody who has a business that makes money from selling plants, and he's selling our project plants, and he is on both sides of the transaction. And if he is on both sides of the transaction, that's a conflict of interest. But you can avoid it by saying, okay, we can consider your plants, but we have to have somebody else make sure they're the right plants, the right price, etc., before we buy them. And so somebody else has to make the decision. You can't let the guy who's the landscaper decide what he's going to deliver for what price. So how do you identify potential conflicts of interest? You have to talk to your own club members. You have to say, here's the project. Is there anybody who has any interest whatsoever? Could be a family member, with the beneficiaries, or with the cooperating organization, or with any of the suppliers that we might use. And now how do you control them? You keep them off of the position where they're making the financial decisions. If they may be advising the committee, but not deciding what happens. You have to have a separate committee. Okay, and then you got to make sure your partner club does the same thing. And if you think about it, it's perhaps, if you're working on a project overseas, it's probably more likely that your partner club has conflicts of interest that you have to manage. So make sure you manage them well. It's not hard. You just say, here it is, define it, and then say what you're doing to control it. And if you got good controls, it'll be accepted. So project plan. Develop an overhaul project plan with all the steps you can think of. And you'll use this several places. It's not really directly put into the application, but it's important to identify all these steps. Think about all the purchasing things you got to do. If you're going to have to buy something, you may have to do competitive bidding. So make sure that you back up enough time so that you have time to do that. If you're going to deliver something that the local people are going to use, then you got to provide training. And if you're going to provide training, you may have to provide training in their language. So that means you've got to get documentation for training and then translate it. So make sure you put all of these steps in there so you don't forget them. Lots of places where you want to do reporting. And so if you put a report in there, then you need to make sure that you have the means to get the information that the report needs. Where is it going to come from? So think about it and make a list of all the elements that need to be included. Okay, now we're going to get to the big S words. Sustainability is one of them. A lot of people worry about sustainability. We've got a good start on it because we started with the community assessment. And you've already done the community assessment. You look at the strengths and needs of the community and make sure you're doing what the community wants and what the community is capable of supporting. And that's really important for sustainability. The second thing, respect natural resources, is one of the things that we in the US, because we've got a lot of different ways of doing something, we don't always think of that first. But if you think about, for example, going somewhere and working on something that uses water, you're going to take water out of the river and use it for growing crops, or you're going to filter it and purify it and make drinking water. And if you're taking water out of the river, then that water belongs to everybody downstream as well as to the people where you're working. And you have to consider everywhere that it goes and everybody that uses it. You can't do something that's going to affect all of the other people because your project won't be successful. It won't be sustainable if you don't address everybody's needs for that resource. Then you got to train the beneficiaries. And one of the reasons is you want them to understand what it is they're getting. They're going to be the ones who probably maintain it and make sure that it's always working. The more they know about what you've delivered, the more likely it is that it's going to be sustained. You want to use local labor, primarily because then if they need repairs or they need something, they know where the local labor is, they can go get it again. Buy locally too. It might be, my club has worked in Haiti, and there are many things that you can buy cheaper here than you can buy in Haiti. But you want to buy it locally because first place, you want to support that local economy, and you want the local economy to keep providing the parts so that the community can go and locally buy spare parts. You establish a maintenance plan and think about who's going to do it, and you have a monitoring group, maybe a person, but that's looking at all the parts of your project. And all of these things contribute to your sustainability. And when they ask questions about it, these are the things you want to put in that section. Stewardship. Okay, who's responsible for project funds and successful project completion? So everybody put your answer in the chat box. First one that gets the right answer gets a prize. Who's responsible for project funds and successful completion?
The first answer is everyone.
No, I'm not responsible.
The second one is both clubs.
That's a good answer. The two clubs, the two partners, generally two clubs, those two clubs are both, I think the lawyers say jointly and severally. Is that not the way they say it? They are both responsible completely for the funds and the project completion. You can't say, oh, it's those other guys who lost it, because you're responsible for the money just as much as they are.
So the winner was Lauren Mitchell, M-I-C-H-E-L.
Congratulations, Lauren. We'll figure out what your prize is.
Kim Haynes of Maryville also got it.
Okay, so how do you exercise responsibility? This is the most important thing is communication, but you got to make sure that you have plans and checkpoints and all of that sort of stuff. And one of the things is to have contingency plans so that when something does go wrong, you've already got some idea about what you're going to do about it. Okay, contingency planning is the next step. This is part of stewardship. What do you do if you're going to have a financial overrun? It's easy to imagine how it could happen, right? The costs go up, or you're doing something and it turns out to be harder than you thought. You wanted to drill 30 wells and the first one cost twice as much as you thought they were going to cost. The second one costs twice as much. You start to get an idea that maybe you're going to have a financial overrun by the time you get to 30. And so in that case, your contingency plan may be, if they are too expensive, I'm going to decrease the number of wells that I drill. And so your contingency plan may say, which are the ones that are most important, or how do I completely satisfy the need in part of the area and maybe come back later and do the other part? That sort of thing. There are different ways you can approach the issue if you've got a financial problem. If you have only one well you're drilling, then your contingency planning may be contingency funds. How much do you have to have in your project in case you run into one kind of a problem or another? So what do you do if you have reporting issues? That's a very common problem where you can't get the information. What do you do if you have a communication problem? That's probably the most common problem, because if you have anything else that happens, usually the second thing that happens is a communication problem. People don't like talking about problems. So that's why you have to have a really good relationship with somebody. And it's very good to have multiple ways of communicating. Different people you're talking to, different levels. You can have your AG talking to their AG about what's going on. An assistant governor is a really valuable person because they can walk in and visit a club somewhere and talk to them just face to face about what's happening. Okay, so you have to develop some contingency plans. Monitoring, evaluation, and reporting, and this is stewardship too. How are you going to check what's going on? And it might be data, it might be observations, it might be verbal reports from people. Any of those things are okay, but you have to be able to evaluate what it is that you get, what's good and what's bad. So you're going to have reports, and the reports are going to be based on your monitoring. Think about what you're going to report and when's the best time to report it. The best practice is to link your reporting to events, not to a particular time. Don't say, I have a year from when I got the money, so I'm going to do my progress report after 1 year. Say 6 months in, or more or less, we will have finished this phase. And at that point, we will have the information on A, B, and C that happened in the first phase. And we're going to write a report at the end of phase 1. Now, everybody knows they got to have that information at the end of phase 1 so you can write the report. And now you're not under time pressure where you're going to be in trouble because you didn't get the report in on time, because you've linked it to an event. And you're going to have a better report because you can say how you completed that phase. Okay, now how do you measure it? We have a monitoring and evaluation plan. And that's down here at this link, so you can go and look at it. But there are a bunch of standard measures. And the Rotary Foundation put in standard measures, and because they want to be able to add things up across different grants. How many people did we provide water for last year? They'd like to look at all the global grants that provided potable water and look at the number of beneficiaries, and that's one of the things you're going to measure. And when you measure them, then they're going to take that data and they're going to roll it up, and they'll be able to go to people like Bill and Melinda Gates and say, see all the water we supplied, or see all the people that we helped with new medical equipment, or whatever it is. And so they want you to use some of these standard measures. But then you need to think about whether there are other measures, maybe based on what you learned when you were talking about sustainability or contingency planning. You know, you may have a measure that's related to your contingency issues. If you think one of the things that might go wrong is something with the water quality, then you might have steps and measures that are based on checking the water quality.
Jim, I hate to interrupt, but we are at an hour and a half now, and I know that Cindy's got her meeting coming up and you're running it. So just a
Oops.
reminder.
Okay. I probably needed a reminder sooner. Okay, we're almost there. You have to do a budget, and I never want to talk much about it, but it's in categories. You put it in these categories. All of us know how to do budgets. It's just a question of getting it all in there and putting it in the right categories. Again, these are for the reviewers. They are things that they have benchmarks for. So they're looking for whether for similar projects you have similar kinds of expenses. Funding. This is, a lot of people think that funding is a challenge. It's not as much of a challenge as you think. The first question, do you have sufficient funding? Almost always no. Second question, does your district have as many global grants as it wants? Almost always no. I can promise you our district wants to have more global grants. Does your district have funds available for more global grants? Yes. What do you know? So we got a situation here where we've got money that's trying to go to projects, and you got a project that's looking for money. We can put this together. How can you get additional funding? There's different ways. Yeah, we have a funding model that we normally use that gets clubs to raise money and put money into it, but we're going to make sure if you've got a good project that you get funded. It's going to happen. Okay, now this is a funding exercise that I don't think I have time to do. But if any of you have trouble with this, I'll be glad to walk you through this. This is just an example where you got to think about, this is how people talk about where their money is, but how do you add this up and find out if you've got enough for a $45,000 project. This takes about 3 minutes to do this. And once you've done it a few times, you can do it with and decide where it is you want to go with your project and your funding. Okay, then we go through approval steps, and once you put it in, you go through locked and submitted, and there's a bunch of things where different people have to review and approve. Like Beth said, as the District Rotary Foundation Chair, that's now Debbie. They have to approve the not only the money, but that the grant is in compliance and that the club is qualified. They have to say all of that is true. And so now you're ready to submit your grant. And so that was pretty easy. It only took an hour and a half. So it does take a little bit longer when you're working on a project. Any questions? Debbie or Beth, who's monitoring for questions?
Well, there's a question, is there a limit on the amount of funding available per grant or per district?
Not by RI. Districts will put limits on how much of their money they may ration it, so only so much for each grant. But one of the things you have to realize is that if we have a really good project, it's not difficult to get other districts that have money but don't have projects to support our project. So that's where you get over the limits. We may say that your club can put in as much cash as you want. We'll provide DDF to match that or match twice that much. And that may help you, but it may not get you to the goal. So then we got to find other sources. And there's 3 or 4 ways to do that. So don't worry about that. When you get to that point, that's where your district grants team and your foundation team can help you, because we got more contacts outside the district. Other questions?
It says, I know someone asked if contingency funds can be a part of the grant request. Along the same lines, can maintenance funds be a part of it if it is necessary for the success of the project?
Not ongoing maintenance funds, but you could, for example, set up some equipment you're going to purchase as spare parts that's there. Generally, if you've got a project that requires a significant amount of maintenance, then you have to say, as you write your grant application, you have to say how you're going to provide for it. One of the ways, again, talking about things like water wells, you put in a water well and you say the community that uses this water well has to provide $20 a month in support fees. And so it could be each family puts in 50 cents and you put in 50 cents a month, and that $20 is enough for a typical well to cover the repairs when they come due. And so the community has to have a way of holding on to that money until it's necessary, and collecting the money and holding on to it. And communities will do it. And then you can buy the spare parts and pay for the repairs.
Jim, you've got a couple more slides. You want to go on through them?
I think, oh, okay. Yeah, this is a challenge for all of you. I'm excited about global grants. I want you to be excited. And so I want you to think about what you're going to do with the information you have. And I really appreciate you spending this time. And if you need more information, or you know what your next steps are, then let me know and I'll be glad to help you.
You've got a lot of compliments in the chat box.
I'm
So,
going to look at all of them. Thank you. Okay,
lots
there's
of
some.
thank yous and how much they appreciate you and all of that. And I know you've got to get off here because you got to go to the next one.
And there's an exit survey. You want to put up that survey?
Okay. Gosh, poor Cindy.
Oh, we got at least 7 more minutes. This is just a quick poll. Doesn't take any longer than the others.
Okay, it's up.
Okay.
There's 4 questions if anybody's.
Yeah, people are only answering 2. They haven't seen the others. Oh, 4 they're answering. Oh, they all said just right. I see. Okay.
It looks like you got pretty good grades.
Okay. Great. Thank you all. I think we better end this so I can go rescue Cindy.
Okay, there's the results.
Great.
182 and 96.
Terrific. Thanks a lot.
See you, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful,
Bye,
Yeah.
everybody.
as
I hope
always.
you do lots of global grants.
We did.
Me
Thanks.
too, and I see lots of new faces. So happy that you attended. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.